Welcome to today's webinar, the 2005 State of Facilities in Higher Education. My name is Billy Zadig, Learning and Credentialing Manager for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage under the Continuous Learning tab later this afternoon. Professional continuing education certificates will be offered for today's program. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the Q&A box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Pete Zara, who will get us started today. Pete, take it away.
Thanks, Billy. Hello, my name is Pete Zara, and I am delighted that you're joining us today as we share some thoughts about the 12th edition of our State of Facilities in Higher Education. At Gordian, we work across a range of services addressing the entirety of the building lifecycle. We think of ourselves as the leading provider of building intelligence solutions, leveraging the same innovative spirit that created job order contracting as a procurement solution and the industry standard RS Means data tools, not to mention the legacy Sightlines, VFA, and KaiCloud innovations. It's our hope that today's conversation is part of a continuum of experiences you have with the company that are all designed to empower organizations to optimize capital investment, organizational performance, and long-term operating expenditures. Each year, we scour our data to identify the trends and a number of key indicators that inform our understanding of the higher ed universe, and which we are eager to share with the larger community. And each year, those findings do seem to resonate with people who explore them. I'm joined today by two remarkable leaders from two essential associations in the industry, and I'll be exploring with them their take on the findings this year. Mike Moss is the president of SCUP, a community of higher education professionals of all disciplines, who through the integrated planning approach are building a sustainable future for higher education. Lilette Agarwal is the CEO here at APA, a gathering place for educational facilities professionals dedicated to the ongoing evolution of the profession. I can think of no better communities of people to challenge, interpret, and leverage the information we're sharing today. And in a stunning turn for both of them, we're not letting them speak yet. I'm going to start today with about a 10-minute conversation, an overview of the 2025 report with a series of slides, and then we'll move into conversation. So the current context for higher education is far more complicated than this slide, but these three trends seem to be jumping out amongst the rest. The enrollment cliff has essentially arrived. It's not officially here till 2026, but if you aren't ready, it's basically too late. We will be seeing a decline in the total number of young people who are college-aged, extending over the next 15 to 20 years. Social sentiment around the value of education for the money and time expended is shifting, as more young people are choosing alternative paths into adulthood, including straight into the work world, vocational training, some of my favorites like being an influencer or buying and selling sneakers. But any kidding aside, there are perceived to be many more ways to get ahead, and traditional college-age students are exploring them. It's cutting into the available pool of students, and it's impacting the historical distinction tied to collegiate education. And finally, while state legislatures have long been questioning how much funding should be provided to public universities, dramatic rethinking of how education is supported at the federal level right now is affecting the resources available to and the very culture of higher educational institutions. These are surprisingly complicated times to get the money to fix a leaky roof. For more than 20 years, we've been tracking the relationship between the size of the campuses we work with and the enrollment on them. The story this year is important for its stability. We continue to see the physical campuses as a whole not growing over the last several years. We see that schools are recognizing the need to consider more thoughtful use of their space for financial reasons, for sustainability, optimization, and efficiency reasons, for practicality reasons. Even those doctoral schools who have been seeing growth in that orange line, while others have not, seem to recognize that an enrollment cap is probably here for most institutions, and some prudence is warranted. I want to make a quick side note that the Carnegie Foundation is in the midst of changing its classification system. We've long used it as a framing mechanism, and we will continue to do so. We're excited to uncover what new slices of the data may arise from their evolving classifications as they get released this spring, and we're going to be eager to share them with you in the future. You see one of those changes already in the notation doctoral instead of research that we've used in the past for that category. One of the ongoing obvious signs of financial stress we see is the shortfall between what's required to maintain existing buildings, again, another orange line, and money expended, both in recurring and one-time dollars. That shortfall this year is just over 30%, and it comes even with a space and inflation-driven reduction in that target for the first time. Owners are seeing and recognizing that they cannot keep adding if they cannot maintain what they have, and that gap continues to persist and make that message clear. It's also therefore no surprise then that the backlog of reinvestment needs, what our financial college colleagues often refer to as deferred maintenance backlog, and what many of us are continuing to push to be called deferred capital renewal, since it isn't maintenance that's being deferred, that number continues to climb, though this year at a slower pace. But if you assign more than $140 a foot to every corner of your campus and give that number to your board, they are going to be concerned. Now, one challenge with an annual report is that you can't always easily come up with new ways to describe a trend that's been in place for nearly 15 years. And in our operating numbers, the gap between inflation and dollars available for operating expenses started following the recession. While that isn't a revelation, this year's data does show the gap not getting worse over the last year. If we're optimistic about technology and even AI, maybe we can find a way to close the impact of that gap, and there are a couple of signs that that's happening. This year, we share in the report that maintenance coverage areas, right, the square footage that individual tradespeople are responsible for, have started to stabilize. The fact that campus growth has slowed certainly helps. And if, as we reported last year, there are more and more ways to creatively insert technology into the work to improve productivity and performance, we could be on the cusp of a shift in the balance of the fight, putting some control back into the hands of the tradespeople who are, in the end, at the heart of the effort to care for these properties. I also want to share an update on a new measure we brought with some caution last year. We reported for the first time on a qualitative metric that we use to measure individual schools' progress against their own service objectives in a number of broad categories. Essentially, in this piece of our work, we're looking at whether conditions seem to be getting better or worse across a campus year over year. And historically, with the qualitative nature of the assessment and the very local nature of the comparison, we don't look at this in aggregate. But last year, we started to see a significant drop across the board and wanted to note the possibility of services suffering under the sustained underfunding we've been talking about, something our data certainly signals could be happening, and we see happening on some campuses. At the time last year, we also cautioned that the data wasn't complete and we would do some more scrutiny. With more data coming in late last year and some extra scrutiny, the measures returned to its messy but relatively stable set of trends. This doesn't discount the possibility that you are seeing locally service impacts on your campus, but we are going to very humbly return this aggregated metric in the future back to our attic, and we're going to leave it there for a while. Now, finally, in the report, in our topical deep dive, we explore some of the ways that AI is impacting our world. The use cases for AI seem endless, from helping with administrative tasks and more advanced versions of robotic tools that are already in use, to ramping up the processing and prioritization of data, or even someday running buildings without us until we need to send that plumber in to actually do the fix on the pipe in the crawl space, because AI is not ready to tackle that yet. In a survey that Gordian did this winter, 11% of respondents said that they were actively actually using AI, while another 53% were actively exploring how they could take advantage of the new resource. According to recent reports by McKinsey and DemandSage, this actually adoption rate is a bit behind the rest of the business world, but we're not surprised. It's not surprising to us. For one reason, the people in facilities organizations are good at a tremendous number of things, but cutting edge technology isn't the biggest priority usually. And for most schools, hiring to bring in that skill set is likely far behind priorities filling open positions or fundamental trades roles. And as facilities isn't the core business of colleges and universities, if any hiring is going to happen in the last year or this year coming up, it's likely to happen first in places that will address the core mission, which is educating students. But there's a second issue, which is that the data needed to inform decision-making on facilities just simply hasn't been tapped into with most AI tools. It's locked up in maintenance systems. It's in digital files for individual buildings. It's in literally old school file cabinets in the minds of craftspeople. And it all needs to be extracted. We report on some efforts in that regard happening right now. Yet this will take some time. So looking forward, the adoption of AI to actually help operationalize its advantages in the facilities world will require a big lift to get the data in the hands of people who will then teach AI tools about the unique world first. Still, just like the enrollment cliff I started with, and arguably the financial hurdles we continue to face, we cannot wait until the ideal AI gets here. It continues to hold true then that if we're going to be creating the future that best services our communities, we need to decide whether we're going to act or be acted upon in this regard as with so many others. The actual report itself and the specific details in it, including our 5 key ideas to consider when exploring AI, has recently been or will be shortly pushed out to all of today's registrants, and you can also find it on the Gordian website. But I want to get back to our guests. Mike and Lillette, welcome back to you both. And yes, I'm going to let you speak now, if you want.
Yes, thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete. And yes, big mistake letting us speak now. So your peril.
Actually, I hope to our audience's benefit. I have a series of questions for you that you promised me you'd try to answer in ways that would be thought-provoking and provocative for the audience. But I need to acknowledge that this is a report about what has been happening, about things that happened before today. And technically yesterday is before today, but I want to say to the audience, I'm not going to be asking any questions and seeking our guests' thoughts on yesterday's tariff announcements. They represent the latest in a series of near-term financial implications that are going to be shaping how we're all coping with existing needs issues and planning for the future. So I'm sure they're going to be on our minds as the conversation proceeds, and they may inform what you guys say, but I'm not going to be asking something specifically to kind of opine about something that is less than 24 hours old. Entering 2025, though, it's hard to consider any conversation about higher ed that didn't contemplate the projected decline in enrollment facing the industry. So I want to ask you if you can talk a little bit about how you think your members have been preparing for this moment or not, and where you think their energy is in this regard, where it's focused today. Mike, you want to talk first?
Sure, thank you. And I want to start with a couple just quick acknowledgements that speak to the question, which is with everything that's going on and has been going on for the better part of this decade, change exhaustion is real. And so whether it was a trend like enrollment, which we saw coming and had lots of information about and lots of conversations about, its arrival still feels urgent. And that is also a reflection of the leadership requirements on all of us in all roles. Change can be exhausting. And I think we're all in the middle of a lot of that. And that's where I think what we're doing here today is so important, is the collaboration between 2 really important communities for the physical space on campus is the norm. It's not the exception. And wanted to acknowledge and thank my colleagues for the invitation to have this conversation, because enrollment challenges and changes are upon us. And I think you mentioned in your opening, Pete, the traditional age student of 18 to 22, there's just quite frankly less of them in the United States, but it's not in all places at all times. And so there will be regional differences in enrollment. And so all things in this conversation we're going to have and all trends are not the same for all folks. I think we all know that, but to really emphasize that with enrollment, there are parts of our higher ed infrastructure that are planning way differently than others because of the projections of the next 5 to 7 years for their enrollment. And so in all cases, though, I do think we can see from the SCUP members that they are working through different types of strategic enrollment management. You may see people recruiting in regions that they traditionally had not in the past. They may be looking at different levels or requirements of admission. You may see program adjustments. And in all cases, everything we're doing from either a financial restructuring or a financial investment, depending on how the enrollment changes are affecting you, that's just with the core maybe mindset of the 18 to 22-year-old. We're also, as we'll talk about more with some of the other questions that you have in front of us that your report speaks to, is there's also a reskilling of a large portion of our workforce. So it's the either already been to school crowd, never been to school crowd, or we all have different levels of training requirements. So a non-traditional student approach to the enrollment challenges will also be in front of us. And then obviously all of this has physical campus impacts. When we look at space utilization and all the things that would come from making decisions off of enrollment projections, both traditional audience and non-traditional, all have an impact on the short-term decisions and we have to make as facility practitioners.
What do you think of that, Lola?
I mean, spot on. Before I respond to the question, first of all, very impressive report. Again, thank you, Guardian, for putting this together year over year, because sometimes as facilities leaders or campus leaders, we get so bogged down in what's happening on our campus, we don't take the time to look at the bigger trend. So putting this report together is a huge service to our industry. So we appreciate you doing that. Specifically going back to the enrollment cliff and the decline in enrollment, it's absolutely true. Recently, we attended a meeting. I think Mike and I both were there, and we heard about the choices that many students are making in not going into college, both because of cost and also because of where they think the value can be about the time they can invest in. It is sometimes a tale of two cities, though. The same folks that are choosing to go to a vocational school may now suddenly increase the enrollment at those vocational schools instead of the traditional four-year colleges. So there is a boom in the community college area for that matter. And then depends on where you are geographically, that also can matter. Some towns that are in the north are facing more declines than those that are in the south, where construction is booming right now because they can't keep up really with how many students are enrolling in their campuses, and they're actually having to turn people away instead of trying to go for that recruitment strategy. So it just depends on where you are and what that looks like. But ultimately, enrollment is going to be tied directly to the budget, and the budget is going to be significantly impacted if the enrollment is declining, and there is no two truths about that. There are already consolidations happening in many parts of the country where schools are either closing their doors or getting absorbed by a different school. And people who went to those schools are feeling left out because suddenly their alma mater has gone away. And that becomes a emotional response, not just a physical response. All we can do as facilities leaders on our campuses or campus leaders is try to find those efficiencies that we are looking for. We have been looking for. Maybe in the past, we have focused primarily on energy related savings to drive our funding imbalances. I think time has come that the leaders need to start looking more holistically on how they can use the same, Mike mentioned space utilization. How can we use the same space for multiple programs? How can we build new buildings that will cater to more than one program? And instead of the typical standard 8 to 10 hour days, how can we extend that day into a 12 to 14 hour day to serve the same students and better utilize that space? So a lot of creative work in front of our leaders at various campuses in how we can do better. So we used to have that saying, can you do more with less? But the real answer is, how can we do different with less? And that's the challenge that we all will be facing.
I love that you're
If I
both
may,
talking
Pete,
about. Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead, Mike. Okay.
That's awesome, Lilette. And what I would like to offer as we go into the next set of questions too, is that what was really well described there is the ecosystem of impact. And so as we think about planning, we have operational planning needs on the daily. Those things are super important. It also speaks to health and safety and wellness, and those things are super important.
Right.
But as we start to spiral off on the daily into the ecosystem of impact from enrollment alone, let alone anything else we talk about, you're talking about community impact outside the walls of the university. You're talking about your staff and their ability to continue to either commute or not, all of the impact that spiral out. So the one thing that I think I really appreciated in your response to that is that all things are collaborative. And so as we continue the conversation, really thinking through in your roles, where are your collaboration opportunities and who do you know in those roles? More so than, how some of these things might come together. Let's start with some of the who conversation as we move forward.
Yeah,
Right.
I love that both of you are talking about the variation and the need for the community to connect itself, right? What's happening in Texas is what's different than what's happening in Maine. I think what's interesting to me working forward is how much of that sharing and learning is going on, how much of the creativity that's being forced in a place like Maine is going to get applied in a place like Texas, so that sometime in the future, Texas is, if it's facing a similar situation, it's going to be able to respond. And I think that those are important issues that any community should be talking about, how to share that information, how to collaborate and learn from each other as you move forward. So that's awesome. And you both have really kind of driven me toward this another question. We have seen, it seems potentially confusing, we have actually seen an easing of inflationary pressures over the last year or so. And that was so much of a concern for a couple of years post-pandemic, right? We were seeing rampant inflationary increases. It isn't to say that inflation is a non-issue. And as I noted earlier, there are countless other budgetary pressures facing schools enforcing really difficult strategic spending decisions. But I mean, I guess I'm wondering how this overall climate's changed the way your members are thinking about looking forward. Are you seeing schools starting to slow down on their planning? Are they starting to slow down on their assertiveness? Are they changing the way they're planning? Like what's happening in the way in which they're thinking about the future based upon the current financial stresses that are out there? Lola, you want to start?
I know. Yeah, I can take that. I think they are facing way too many indirect pressures on a single budget, and they are recognizing that that is a challenge, and the terminology that they have been using is shifting as those headwinds are impacting their decision making. And even Pete, you and I were at a recent conference together, and we went through an exercise that actually you hosted. People said we don't even talk to some of these people on our campuses in those roles on a regular basis, and that's
Yeah.
where I think the collaboration is becoming even more important. To your earlier point about would Texas or a Maine person have that two different things happening in two different geographical areas, but it could also be a nearby state, and New Hampshire might having a similar problem. And that's where I think the value of some of our groups like SCUP and APA come into play, where they can come together and have that conversation and actually lean on each other to learn what the other campus is doing, so we can leverage the information, because information becomes the key in many of these. Nobody has the crystal ball. So I know Mike's group is really driven by what will be happening 5 years from now. Well, you don't know what will happen 5 years from now, because we don't know what's going to happen 5 months from now many times. So while the inflationary pressures are easing, I think the impact of what has happened over the last few years and what we are seeing in news anymore is creating that PTSD for all the people in that business, where they're saying, "Oh, is that going to change again? I budgeted for $60 million for this new building. Is it really going to cost me $100 million? How am I going to adjust for that? And for any of the other planning that needs to be done for another future building that was even in the earlier stages of planning, how is that going to be impacted? And especially if you have to move funding from one place to another, how's that going to work?" So I don't think there is a single answer that anybody has on this issue. It's just going to depend on situation by situation. But even the most recent news as of yesterday, as you mentioned earlier, Pete, we don't know what the impact is going to be. And everybody's, I think, a little anxious about what that means. And
Yeah.
time will tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, we're always at a risk of getting lost in terminology and vocabulary, but at the end of the day, the simplistic approach to how we solve these problems is where we actually do good work. And so as we think about, to your point, Lillette, the planning horizons of the past that we were looking out 10, 15, 30 years, those things are still important. I would never want to minimize those importance, but in the moment we're in, a 3 to 5 year horizon might be what we need, so that we can really focus on the streamlining of administrative cost, or looking at a different sort of multi-year phased approach to capital improvements, so that the outlays are managed but still moving forward. And I think what we've seen a lot of conversation around is, how do we start to have those conversations with our stakeholders on the campus, including the students, about what's the most important student-facing need, and what's then after that, and then what's after that, and maybe that starts to set your planning horizon now. But really starting with those critical needs and critical services, housing, food, the obvious, but then there's also your academic plans are shifting. Your academic programming may be shifting. How quickly can we make sure that that all those units of the campus are on the same planning path together for those student-facing services? And that's very, very difficult. I don't want to minimize that at all. But the importance of it, where we used to be able to think we had X amount of time, to your point, Lillette, it's much quicker. And we need to be maybe more, to use a word that we often overuse, is we need to be more agile. But I do think that is real.
I'm recollecting a conversation I had with a colleague of ours collectively who was on a campus in maybe May of 2020, and they had peers on campus, right? In that network, Lillette, that you were saying sometimes people don't talk to each other. They had peers on campus saying to them, "We don't have time to plan. We've got to deal with the situation in front of us." And they were really struck by that reaction to the stress. And I guess I hear you both urging institutions to think in the biggest sense as well as in the short sense, to make sure that we don't lose that framework, even in the face of so many changing challenges. And I do think that it's an industry that has grown, perhaps complacent is not the right word, but we've been talking about this now for a few years, that the industry had gotten used to just its continuation, and every element of its continuity is being challenged right now. And it's really important that organizations really rally around what it takes to think about the future, what it could look like, and do some scenario planning to make sure that they're clear about it. And the biggest sense, as well as how to plan for that building that everybody knows needs to go forward if this institution is going to be here next year. And we're not saying every institution is not going to be here next year, but institutions have been disappearing or being absorbed. And so that change is out there for some.
Right.
I'm sorry, you were going to say?
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. In the report to that end, we noted that the schools have been tempering expansion, right? And the awareness, I think, of underinvestment in existing structures has assumed a much more visible presence in conversations that we're hearing people talk about as the kind of reality of living with existing buildings, or even if they have a more disciplined replacement strategy, right? Replace, build and then demolish, takes effect. Can you talk about what you think leading institutions are doing that's in the spirit of what you're saying about planning, are doing that's smart to not just weather this moment, but really kind of take advantage of it? Are there things that they're trying that you think that are thoughtful and informative that we should be paying attention to?
I'll let Mike go first this time.
Yeah, I would start with cross-institutional collaboration, and I think there's obviously two uses for that. There's cross-institutional on your own campus, but there's cross-institutional with the institutions in your area. And I do think the cross-institutional cooperation, whether it's shared models of anything, you think about co-ops as an example. But if you think about how you can have that cross-institutional collaboration, you might find effectiveness and efficiencies that allow you to maintain whatever it is, that safety level, whatever that is, but that student-facing work. And you also, I think we have to acknowledge that there is some strategic divestment strategies that also are no longer hypothetical, but are in action. And when you think about the space conversation, we want to optimize space. That's 100% the right approach. And in that, you also may find opportunities for space reduction. And if you do find ways to optimize your space and free up space for other alternative uses, that may actually even be a community use. It may not have to be only in support of your academic plan. And then that cross-institutional piece can come in. Are there other institutions that could utilize that space and have an arrangement to optimize both programs? Especially as we think about student pipelines, to our earlier conversation. There might be a way for that cross-collaboration to really drive solutions to a couple major trends, which is obviously cost, budget, resources, talent and people, and enrollment. How are you using all that physical space to your advantage?
Yeah. Yeah, and to your question, Pete, the tempering of expansion based on what we are seeing in the data that you're collecting in the report, I believe there has been a significant improvement in leadership of campuses realizing that the assets they have already on their hands, the existing structures, they can probably be revived and reutilized and revitalized instead of just going and building a new building. The challenge sometimes comes when the source of the funding to build a new building is usually donors, and donors like to see their name on the new building rather than
Yeah.
a building being revamped. So that becomes a challenge, but I think even there are creative ways where campus leadership is working towards figuring that out. And then when the reinvestment is happening in some of these buildings, especially if there is a large enough capital renewal effort that's taking place, utilizing of space, the space utilization equation, and making sure that you create that multi-purpose utilization. So instead of just fixing the building and bringing it up to the same function that it used to have, but rethinking how you can create a multi-purpose utilization space, that reinvestment has a lot more ROI than it would be if it was just doing what it was already created for. And in the end, it just depends again on where you are. Some places, the enrollment is still growing, and they will need to keep building those spaces and continue investing. And that's actually a bigger challenge, where instead of having the recognition for just reducing your space, you have the resources to create new buildings. I think all the campus planners and campus leaders and facilities leaders need to take a pause and ask, do we really need that space? Are we utilizing our space well? Maybe work with some of the industry leaders that are developing technologies that can actually help answer that question, whether it's occupancy sensor driven, if it is Wi-Fi data driven. There are many tools that are already available in the industry that you can utilize right now to answer that question. Are we actually utilizing our space properly? And if we are not, then it is important for us to not take the approach of let's keep building, and if you build it, they will come. They may not come, and that's where the challenge is becoming real now. We are actually seeing that they may not come. So that's where I think it is important to ask that question and answer that question before we continue building new buildings.
You're reminding me, I know an institution, we've done some work there, but they are using partners for those kinds of things to assess utilization. And then they're, interestingly enough, directing their master planning team to be much more aggressive, right? I think we're used to a bad reputation for some master planners that they're always, talking about growth, and they're being very directive to say to their master planners, we're not growing. We're one of the institutions that actually needs to shrink, right? They're facing that, and they're courageously looking hard at themselves to say, how can we be a different organization, a different institution in the future? And they're challenging everybody that's working with them to think differently. And that's a brave thing to do as an institution, number one, but it takes the exercising of a very different muscle. To get partners and people internally to think differently about the future, still about vitality, still about strength and excellence, but in a different formulation than they're used to in their legacy past. And I think we're probably going to see more and more institutions having to have those kinds of serious conversations about identity that this is all going to force. I want to take a turn in a different direction. Last year's document, we spent some time talking about finding talent. And the challenge of finding talent. In this year's data point, in this year's document, I have a data point that talks about staffing and coverage levels in maintenance organizations, but it doesn't really talk about whether there's still a challenge finding people. And I'm sensing there's still challenge finding people. Are you sensing in your conversation with members that there's still a challenge in finding people? And are there techniques people are using to get people into the workplace to deal with this? Because if we have less money, we also definitely need the right number of people there to at least keep the place running.
Absolutely. And I was actually, one of the services APA provides is APA Advisors, where I was actually part of a team that went to a campus recently. And during that process, we were able to see their org charts and how many vacancies they have. Their vacancy was as high as 40%. So really having a hard time recruiting and retaining staff because of some restrictions, either from the state or whether it is a restriction from the campus HR or finding that skilled trade set that is more happy to go work at a Facebook data center down the street than come and work at a campus, which is not as sexy as working for a data center might be. And the skill set is changing too. So back in the day, when I was at University of Nebraska at the utility plant, we used to hire operators that would have to run around and turn valves on and off, or actuators on and off. That shifted over the last 20 years as technology evolved, where we were now looking at people who had more technical skills that can be sitting in the control room and modulating those same valves and actuators by clicking a mouse rather than actually going and physically doing it in the field. So it's not just the kind of people that we are bringing in, but also the kind of skill sets that we are trying to bring in that becomes a big challenge. But again, as leaders, we have to be continuously thinking about not just backfilling the roles that we have vacated, but also reimagining what kind of skill set are going to be needed for us to be successful in future as the operators and the planners of our campuses.
Well said, and I think one of the things to offer too is that as the outcome of some of those realities that you mentioned is alternative staffing models are being explored. Someone had asked a question about that in the feed here, specifically to facilities, but more broadly, what does it look like to have specialty staff different, like maybe that's on contract and you have more critical student-facing, staff-facing services on your full-time employee roster. So exploring those things, I think, is really also addressing the fact that there are many of us who probably will be retiring sooner than later. And we haven't really created a lot of backfill systems yet for that talent. And at the same time, the requirements, as you note, for that talent is different than when I may have even done it 2 years ago, let alone what I may have done 15 years ago. So the data literacy is in every role now, right?
Yeah.
And that's a skill set that requires training and investment. So as much as we are appropriately talking about investment in physical spaces, the investment in people is also that resource requirement that we must make sure that we're talking about in our planning meetings. And I think, Pete, we had talked about this before in a previous call, which was make your professional development budget the last thing you cut, not the first thing you cut. And that is a really hard thing to do. I acknowledge how stressful that is for the people doing budgets, but we are going to have to continue to make investment in the talent, because the tools that may supplement our need for 100 people, and now we have a need for 50 people, the skill requirements for those 50 need constant training. And obviously I'm biased, I work for a training-based organization, but I do think at the same time, that skill set enhancement investment needs to be a really part of the critical funding discussion, as much as all the other things that we've noted today.
Right. That's a business absolute, that you have to be prepared to make changes because the world's changing around it. You mentioned that from the very top of your remarks, Mike, that the world is changing and you have to be able to adjust. And not everybody's able to adjust at the same time. Not everybody has access to those things. So we have to make sure that those tools are in place. One of those big adjustments that is happening, of course, is AI, which seems like it's everywhere. We're exploring its use across Gordian. I know you two are eager to leverage it, the technology for organizations, and you're struggling to figure out exactly how that works. In the report, we caution that while many forms of AI are sprouting up to help in a variety of industries, there's still a dearth of tools to really move AI forward as an aid to operating and caring for buildings, to get the information that's necessary out into the tools so that it can actually be helpful for buildings themselves. How are you seeing AI entering the field, and what are some of the ways that you imagine it's going to be impacting the industry from where the two of you are sitting? Mike, you want to take a shot first?
It's been referred to already in the conversation here, but there's a lot of automation opportunities, data aggregation faster. So I'm going to keep this one short because I really think Lilette's got a lot to offer on this topic, because I think when we get to the challenges of AI, perhaps come back to the planning guy. But I would offer, we are an encouraged use shop at SCUP. We know AI is here. We are encouraging its use as a knowledge-based business. And I think all of us on the call, including attendees, are in the same space. But what we would say is that right now, the current state of the technology is using it for effectiveness and efficiency, but leave critical decision-making still to the human interaction is probably the best tactic, meaning that AI is really good to find out better questions, but not to find better answers. So using all of the things that it can do and providing an output, then you put the human expertise and experiential to it is probably the best approach to how these tools are currently showing up in our workforce.
Well,
I
that
don't
really
know
answered
if I
my-
can if I can say anything more. Mike really covered it all in a very nice summation there. What I can do though is I can add analogy here. In many ways, I don't see today's AI as fully autonomous technology. It is more augmenting what humans can do, and we can do more effectively. I don't like the word efficiently because it seems like we're cutting corners somewhere, but more effectively is what I think we are able to do. So first, let me talk about from a personal point of view. So personally, I use ChatGPT every day. I am actually more and more using ChatGPT than I'm using Google for that matter. I'm not even going to the search engine and searching for things. I'm basically asking AI to give me the answer that I'm looking for because the output of the answer is very significantly better. And the context that the AI tools can keep rather than having to start over your search are significantly better. Just recently, we were looking to open a position at APA, and I asked AI to create a job description for me, which would have taken me an hour. It took me all of 3 minutes. And then I created more prompts, so it refined it a little bit for me. I went to bed thinking I had it all figured out. Next day, I woke up and I was like, "Oh, is this job description an exempt role?" And I asked AI that, "Do you think this would be an exempt role?" He said, "No, this particular one will not be an exempt role." And I was like, "Well, what would need to change for it to become an exempt role?" It made adjustments to the job description. And then it suggested, "You may also want to think about changing the title here." So that is something that would have taken either a significant expertise from somebody who has human resources background, which I don't, um, and a lot of hours, even if they had that expertise. It took me a few minutes to do that. Now, again, to Mike's point earlier, don't just blindly take what the AI is producing, put your human energy into it and then make it refined and make it better. So that's what I ended up doing in creating the final job description. I posted it for collecting resumes. So that's kind of from a personal point of view, how it has enhanced my personal productivity or our team's productivity. The way I can draw another analogy to facilities is how the augmentation is working is think about a car that back in the day did not have a cruise control. It's kind of like a building that did not have a building automation system. Eventually, all cars anymore have cruise control in it, and all buildings anymore on our campuses are starting to at least get building automation system, which again takes away a lot of effort from our human capital and those skill sets that we are unable to fill right now. The technology is kind of taking it over. So instead of outsourcing your work to somebody else, you're outsourcing it to technology. But as technology has grown in cars, so many of your cars have lane keeping assist, automatic braking. That's where AI is moving. Many tools available that sit on top of your building automation systems in your facilities that are basically looking at fault detection or many other tools like that that can already do a lot of those extra human-like efforts that can make your human input much smaller while getting a lot better outcomes out of your effort. So that's where we are. We are human augmented. Do we have fully autonomous cars? We are starting to get them. Will we have fully autonomous buildings? I hope so someday, but I don't think that technology is there yet. But I know
Yeah.
many of our business partners are working towards those solutions. So where is it that point that we become fully autonomous? I do not know. But we are definitely getting much more closer to the autonomy than we have been. But ultimately, words of caution, be careful on what the output of AI is and make sure that you put your eyes and brain into it. and then make sure that what you're using AI for does not leak your proprietary information to anybody. So if you're going to put proprietary information, better get those tools that you're actually paying for that promise not to share your information anywhere. So
Right,
that's how I see AI.
those are all good cautions too, right? I think with all the optimism, there has to be some discipline applied to it, right? We in the report we talk about the fact that you should never use AI to create a solution that you don't know what you think you want to have be the outcome, right? If you create a resume but you don't know what a good resume is going to look like when you read it, this would be a bad thing to do. You have to at least know what it's going to augment your process. It's maybe accelerate your process, to Mike, your point about speed, but it has to still be helping you get to a place that you know where you want to go. Otherwise, that kind of unchecked behavior is irresponsible at best, but it's pretty scary right now, given what some of the things that can come out of AI in its current state, its current development, and that's changing rapidly every day. But we need to get there. Mike, did you have other cautions? You said you might be good at the cautionary side of things, and Alette was making a good list of cautionary things there.
No, I think that was explained very well, and it kind of goes back to of all things in any application, which is just because you can, should you, is that we do have the technology capable to truly track someone based on their connectivity to the campus Wi-Fi. We can track them pretty much on their entire journey on campus that day. But did they know that? Did we need that? And how are we protecting that data either way? So obviously there's huge privacy concerns and implications here that we just need to honor and respect. And then to Alette's point, just be transparent about what you're doing and why. And I think sometimes the speed and urgency to solve a problem, we can develop also dependencies into some of these things where we might start to get really good results, really good answers. And then are we keeping ourselves sharp on our own troubleshooting skills to identify when there might be a hallucination out of the machine? So there's a lot of things that we have to be careful with that are obvious and well talked about. But the one that I would also offer is the same as we have with other types of relationships, which is a vendor lock-in. Is that when you get into the specialty application like this, you may end up being locked into a vendor that began beautifully protecting your data, protecting your students, protecting your privacy, protecting your cybersecurity. And then they became so proprietarily locked in that you've now lost that agility we talked about earlier when something else is needed in your planning paradigm or your facility support. Are they actually able to still move with you, or are you now locked into what they can only do? And then, of course, the cost implications that would come with that. Not different than other vendor situations we all manage, but a new one, because the speed by which that can happen, by the speed of which the tech changes, to y'all's points, we have to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, you both mentioned the notion of transparency. I think it's really, really important. It's not that any of us mind. I got in the car the other day and Waze asked me if I wanted to go someplace before I even gave it a direction, because it just knew that at that time of day I'm always going the same place, which is fun. But I love that advantage. I just need to know, I need to be aware of what Waze knows about my life, and to your point about any of the technologies, we need to know those. I think, Lilette, you also mentioned something about cost, I think, which is really important. We introduced the new text, we introduced cost with that. So it's not as though cost goes away. It's a different way to solve a problem. But as we've all gotten used to with building automation systems, they become outdated and you have to update them. So now we're making buildings more sophisticated, they can do more things, but there's an ongoing renewal cost to that. It's going to add to the pile of renewal needs that we cited in my earlier comments, right? There has to be renewal investment to sustain these buildings and their sophistication going forward. So it is not a simple one-off linear trade-off that we're talking about here. It's much more sophisticated than that.
And if I could ask a question on behalf of
please.
the list, and I think you two are very well positioned to answer this, which is the question was, and you just talked about it, the sophistication of the academic support and the training and the programs are lending towards very sophisticated buildings. And sometimes our very normal, whatever that means, but our non-sophisticated buildings are absolutely super sufficient to do this. But we often don't equate that, and we go for the larger high-tech, high-touch build because it makes sense. It certainly would support the academic plan and mission. But how do we help have that conversation on campus about the adaptive use of what some may see as a dated facility? It actually will meet these needs with some small adaptation versus an entire investment into all the new tech.
And that's a very astute question, whoever asked it in the chat, because ultimately, instead of just talking in facilities talk, to Mike's previous point at the beginning, it's the who that matters. It's the who that's who we are doing it for. It's the faculty, it's the students, it's the researcher. It's if you have a hospital, it's the patient care. So we have to be very careful about making sure that we don't just do facility speak. We talk to them in terms of what they understand. And if you give them a high level of confidence that they can still successfully engage in their programming for whatever that programming is in their buildings with slight adjustments, and be creative, be thinking about how you can do that. That's going to be the key to our success in future.
There are a number of other questions that have come through. I'm just going to throw a couple of them out at you two just to see if you want to kind of throw an answer out there to some of these. In addition to space utilization targets, are you hearing talk about space standards across universities shifting? Are we seeing proposals for smaller offices, fewer numbers of offices for people, smaller labs? Is there compression in that regard as well right now?
I haven't seen any standards necessarily, but each campus is talking about that. And that is definitely a very interesting question that we probably should, as an industry, think about and probably help create some guidelines, even if it's not a standard necessarily, of what that looks like if you're a public, private, if you are a liberal arts school versus a research institution. I think that's a very astute question that we should probably all think about as an industry. I'm not aware of any standards that have already started forming, so I'll defer it to Mike or yourself, Pete.
No, I same, but I do see to your question, Pete, and those examples specifically, there's a lot of conversation and movement towards what might look like guidelines. And the one thing I might offer is at SCUP, we publish a lot of articles that would be use cases, case studies, however perspective you want to put on it. And quite honestly, when you first go into it, when the numbers are in front of that beginning of the case study to set the story, if I don't have relatively comparable numbers, it can feel like, well, this isn't for me. But I think to Lalette's point, please go through those use cases and case studies, because whether the math or not is the same as yours, the problem solving of who they talk to and how they got to the resolution is in all of those stories. And so both of our organizations operate as knowledge-based and communities of practice. And so there's some amazing questions in the queue here that I am not capable of answering 100%, but I know who can. And so you had mentioned earlier, reach out to the presenters today and we can connect y'all. And I would encourage people to not lose those questions just off of today's broadcast, but to let us connect you with peers and community members who have those stories that do the solutions, but maybe not in the same manner that your campus requires, but the solution matrix might work. So getting lost in the terminology and numbers can sometimes discourage us from going into the who question.
Along that lines, Mike, I'm going to make a commitment on our behalf that we're going to go back through these questions and see if we can get some responses or directions sent back to the people we don't get to their questions, because I want to make sure there's just a ton of questions coming in. There's a really interesting suggestion here that I frankly haven't heard anything about yet, but it makes total sense. The question is, with so many people, or the comment is, with so many people leaving the federal government, looking, is there a possibility of looking at former GSA staff as a resource to fill vacancies? I think it's a great suggestion. I'm wondering if you guys are hearing anything about that, or if anybody's talking about that as a place to go to find people, because there are clearly people looking for work.
Oh, trust me, I know. I told you about this job that I put out last Thursday. One job, I have 780 applicants right now.
Wow.
And now the challenge becomes, how do you go through and identify the right person that you really would like to hire? Because the big fear is that you're going to lose somebody that really would have been an ideal candidate to come join the team. So these things come in waves. If you think 4 years ago, when people were not even showing up for interviews or getting the job offers and not showing up for job on day one, we are on the opposite end of that spectrum right now, where there is a lot of people out there in the industry looking for work. I think it's a brilliant idea when you have one problem on the other hand where you cannot recruit and retain. and there is plenty of people that are sitting out there looking for an opportunity. Be nimble, be creative. If your team can support remote work, maybe make that as an offer, because that will definitely help you fill those roles more than if you require people to move. So you don't have to uproot them or disrupt their lives. So absolutely, that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. And the person suggesting specifically cited the GSA as a place to go, and I think it's a great idea.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I
I've certainly
wanna
been in
I
a
wanna
lot of conversations, Pete, where it may
Yeah.
come off as conjecture or ideation, but absolutely people are looking at talent pools differently, with available talent that is now, it's in the market. But it does, to the challenges that Lillette said, I still hear the same things. It's like when I had 70 applications before and now I have 700. How do we make sure that we're still following the processes required by the culture of our campus for the talent recruitment that we do?
We have a number of questions here that I'm going to curtail and suggest we're going to get back to people and post the answers somewhere, because they just require really long, thoughtful replies, and we're running out of time. So I think with that, I'll just say that we're going to answer those remaining questions in a written format. We'll get back to individual questioners, or we'll post them publicly as a response to this, leveraging the two of you to help secure those answers. And so with that, I guess I want to do a couple quick shameless plugs for the associations, a couple of association-related resources. The first of which is App is hosting an event in June as part of their ongoing targeted titles and topics series focused on AI. So if you're remotely interested and have the energy for a small group discussion that's focused on actually moving the topic forward, I would definitely encourage you to check out this. These are great small group engagements. And then second, the team at SCUP is always inviting you to check out their materials, but in this case, the latest trends in higher education report, you're going to see a significant list of key trends that are happening in higher ed right now, and some tools to help you and your team start playing the process. And finally, I want to remind everybody the copies of the report upon which this hour was built will be pushed out to all who registered for today's event. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and a special thanks to my two collaborators for making the webinar way better than it could have ever been with me doing it alone. I was actually thinking it's kind of like having Prince and Johnny Cash just walk into your recording studio and say, "Can I help?" So I appreciate you both, Prince and Johnny, and I want to thank everybody for attending today, and we wish you all the best of the rest of your day and the rest of your week.
Thank you for facilitating, Mike,
Yeah, thank you.
and Pete. Appreciate being partners in
Alrighty.
crime.
Alrighty. Take care, everybody.
Be well.